So let's get back to Davy Crockett and Andrew Jackson. So around 1814, they had an army of about 1,200 volunteers from Tennessee. They went down to go find the Creek Indians. They were called the Red Sticks. And that battle was called Horseshoe Bend. And it was somewhere around Alabama on a river. And there was about 800 Creek Indians, and he had about 1,200. And they finally tracked him down on this bend called Horseshoe Bend. And the Indians, the river was behind him, and they circled him, and it was a massacre.
The Mississippi River.
No, it was a river around the Alabama, Mississippi. I'm trying to remember, but anyway, it was a very bad incident. The Americans massacred 800 of the 1,000 Indians. Only 200 survived.
Wow.
And it was so bloody. That's the Creek War ended right then. But Davy Crockett and my grandfather was upset about it because it was really a bad thing. And then Davy Crockett, right after the battle, goes to Andrew Jackson. I just don't know. Segment 7, America Talk It Up. And talking about 7, wasn't Mickey Mantle's number 7?
I still have the T-shirt that I wrote with paint, black paint. And I found it tucked away because I was determined never to get rid of number 7, because that's the number I wanted to wear when I was a kid. And I wore it as a little leaguer.
So if I go to the casino and we play craps and I roll the dice 7, we're a winner.
Always with Mickey. 350 feet high, up in the air, over the wall at Yankee Stadium.
Yes. And then at the craps table, it's one of the few games, if you play the pass line, you got maybe the house only has a 4%, maybe 5% advantage over you, so you could win if you play conservative. I've done it a few times, but I'll tell you, it's tough. The casino's got your number. That's why it's so tough to gamble. But it is fun, and I love throwing that dice when it hits 7.
And then you're going to say, ha, after you throw it out there.
Well, it's even better if you have a beautiful woman who takes the dice and she blows in the dice for good luck, right?
Wow. You're already a winner before you throw the dice.
There's times I could have used a couple good-looking women blowing that dice, just a little bit for me. But, but with that said, let's talk about, we just found out that Major League Baseball is going to have a 60-game schedule. They're going to start on July 23rd and 24th. And you know my thoughts on this right now, Henry. It's going to be a 60-game schedule. That means the teams in a 162-game schedule, usually the best teams go to the top. But during a 60-game season, a wild card team could come out of there. The old guys are going to be juvenated. The young guys are going to try to prove themselves. So this could be kind of exciting with 60 games. Some of these teams who might not be contenders could be in there at the very end.
Well, I don't know how it's going to come out. 10 playoff teams, is that what they said? 60 games. And so it's going to be a year to save the pitchers. They don't have to throw as much, and it's going to save them all a little bit. It's a season that you don't really know how you feel about the Astros and what they did and what kind of an effect the cheating had on baseball, period. But something during this negotiation period with Major League Baseball, period, the owners, and how the players were so greedy. They were bothered by this, that, and the other, but the biggest thing, they wanted equal paychecks to what they made before, or a paycheck that to me was greedy.
Well, for half of the season. But, I agree with you on that part of it. It's going to affect a team like the Dodgers. They put a roster together for 162 games for endurance and pitching staff. In a 60-game season, like I said, these other teams can probably compete because they don't have to go through the endurance. So it's going to be interesting how this thing plays out. It's going to be interesting how people are going to take the Astros with the cheating going on. Can Alex Bregman, can he redeem himself, because everybody right now thinks he had an advantage, and he probably did. So I'm hoping, and of course Brakeman is the hometown kid from Albuquerque, went to Albuquerque Academy, one of the best players probably ever come out of this town. So I hope he has a good season. I'm rooting that he does well. You know the Astros are going to get a lot of jive from the fans and the players. Now, right now, they're planning on, early on, they're not going to have fans in the stands right now, and we'll see how it goes. The way this thing is going with the virus, we don't know how this thing's going to play out at the end. Right? I mean, if right now, I think it's going to be like a week-to-week deal.
Yeah, first of all, I want this thing to pass by. I don't want Alex to get hurt from it. I've known the family forever. I've known Alex since he was playing as a 6-year-old out at the all-dirt baseball park.
Right.
And broadcast many of his games. So he's my little buddy, now a grown man. And I don't want to see him get hurt by this thing. He's going to take a few hits. I mean, not literally hits, but he's going to take a few comments about what he did, and he'll grow from it. But I just know the family. They're upset about it, too. They don't want their image to be that, because they're not cheaters.
They're not. And, you know, knowing Alex Brakeman, the times I've been able to talk to him, he is more determined to show everybody he is the best coming into the season.
And he's the best that ever came out of here, without a doubt.
And I'm telling you, knowing this guy's personality and his chemical makeup, what he's all about, I gotta believe he's gonna come out storming really big time. He wants everybody to know that he's the best. Now, the story I heard about Mike Trout that was in the paper, his wife is pregnant right now, and she's expecting in August sometime. And they did say that if you think you are in jeopardy, maybe do it with your wife, you can opt out with full pay. So Mike Trout might not play in August. We don't know. It's all going to turn with this virus, but they're letting these guys opt out. They feel like they're in danger of, jeopardy of getting the virus. So right now, I know they're going to be tested. I'm glad baseball is back, because we do need it for the psyche of this country. And if they can play it clean and safe, I think, and I'm going to be watching the games. Are you? I'll be watching them.
Oh, I'm a sports fan. Pandemic or not, I'll be watching the games. I love the game. I played it myself. All of us played the game. We can relate to it. And at that level, and especially here in New Mexico, when one of ours is one of the all-time greats right now, man, I'm going to watch. And when Alex gets to the plate, I want to cheer wildly, because that's our guy. So stand behind him.
Yeah, and I'm going to be rooting for the Astros. I want them to do well. They're just a young, fun team. Of course, I grew up supporting the Dodgers when I lived here in Albuquerque. When I was a little boy, I loved the Yankees because of Mickey Mantle. And then when I moved to Chicago, I lived in San Francisco for 2 or 3 years. I was kind of a Giants fan because they went to the pennant in 1989. I went to the World Series. I'm one of the few guys that have been to a World Series game and never saw the game played because of the earthquake. They told us to leave the stadium, Candlestick, and I had to march out. To this day, I've never seen a World Series game. I've been to one, but never saw the game. And then
your favorite Chicago Cub ever?
I would say
Give me 2.
I like Mark Grace because I got there at the end of Mark Grace's career. Of course, I love Ernie Banks and Billy Williams. And then, I was there when Sammy did as we talked in the last segment, the last episode, I was there with Sammy hitting all those home runs. And Sammy was so popular, so I became a Cubs fan because when I lived in Chicago, I started going to Wrigley, and if you've never been to Wrigley Field, that neighborhood, Henry, it is just a wonderful thing. It's what baseball is all about. It's like going to Fenway Park. Those 2 parks, Fenway Park and Wrigley, are probably the 2 greatest ballparks that was built back in the early 20th century. So I became a Cubs fan, and then I bought season tickets for 6 or 7 years. Section 206. I was at row 25, seat 4 through 8, and I went in with about 10 or 12 guys. We all pitched in about $500, and we bought season tickets and a parking pass. So I was able to go to a lot of Cubs games. So I'm still a Cubs fan. I was so happy they finally won the World Series. That was kind of a... And I was there when the Bartman ball, so I had some good experience. But Candlestick was fun. In 1989, Henry, I went to 34 Giants games. I went to 22 A's game. Now, I was single at the time, and I was working for a CPA firm, and they had season tickets, but nobody wanted to go during the week to Candlestick. It was cold. As you know, Mark Twain said the coldest winter I ever spent was the summer in San Francisco. In Candlestick, you had to wear a jacket, ski jacket. You had to wear gloves. This is in July. And and so that was the year they won the pennant. Roger Craig, he was the manager, and they had Will the Thrill Clark, the great kid from Mississippi State, first baseman. And then that was the World Series they went to. And, of course, the A's won 4 games. And it was first time in the Bay Area both teams made it to the World Series. So that was probably the summer of 1989. It's like the summer of 49 or the summer of 98. That was my summer because I had a chance to go watch both teams play, and both teams made it to the World Series. How many people get that opportunity? 1989.
Wow, you're fortunate.
And I became a Giants fan, and then I moved to Chicago, and I was still kind of a Giants fan, and that's when Barry Bonds went to the Giants, and then all of a sudden, you just couldn't help become a Cubs fan, the lovable losers, and boy, and I would say the St. Louis Cardinals, they love their team, but the Cubs, they love their team. And I remember when I first met somebody in Chicago when they did the White Sox. They started interleague play when I got there, the White Sox and the Cubs. And I asked one guy, I said, are you a Cubs fan? Yes. He said, I only root for the White Sox. He said, I only root for two teams, the Cubs and whoever plays the White Sox.
And I remember all the Cubs games around the Albuquerque cable network.
WGN.
With Steve Stone and Harry Carey. And that was always a show. Yeah, and I love the show they put on.
I think I said this in one of our segments, but one of those games, the Cubs are getting killed 12-4, so they're trying to eat up time. And in the 5th inning, they show this couple making out in center field in the bleachers. And then in the 6th inning, they come back and they're still making out. And Harry said, "Boy, those two kids really love each other. They're still making." And then in the 9th inning, and the Cubs are at this time the Cubs are losing 15-4. One of those games where they're just getting killed. They go back in the same place. The same couple was making out, and then finally Harry made the famous quote. He says, "I think she's kissing her on balls and he's kissing her on strikes." And boy, did that go crazy on WGN. Wow. Only Harry Carey can get
That's even too heavy for today's TV audience.
Right. So that was funny. Listen, we're gonna wrap this up, and we're gonna come back and we're gonna talk about some history. The Battle of New Orleans, the Battle of Horse
Andrew Jackson.
And my grandfather, James Watts, and Davy Crokett.
Davy? They made a song about him.
Davy Crokett.
Hey, I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Welcome back to segment 2, American Talk It Up. And by the way, if people are watching this show, they can go up to Facebook and look, type in, America Talk It Up, and please press the follow button or the like button, or if you can go up to YouTube, you can type in America Talk It Up on YouTube.
Everybody I talk to loves your show.
Yeah,
I love Marty Seiss, the storyteller.
I mean, Marty Watts, the storyteller. Seiss is our buddy Marty Seiss.
See, I knew I'd have that reaction again. That was almost an accident.
I get everybody. It's not the first time somebody called me Marty Sites. I mean, Marty Sites is Mr. State Farm here in New Mexico.
He's your buddy too.
Yeah, he is my friend. I consider him a really good friend. So so we.
So don't get mad at me.
No, I'm not. But if you want to go to YouTube, hit the subscriber button, and then if you want it, I challenge everybody to go up to Henry T. Game Face Live and hit the follow button on Facebook and follow Henry. He has about, how many shows do we have so far? About 14 now?
It's not too many.
Yeah, and every show's exciting. And by the way, you see Henry playing off me on this podcast, but in my opinion, Henry's the best interviewer in sports today. He is. And one of these days, he's going to do a story on Muhammad Ali, and boy, that will be a story when you do that one.
Thank you. But, apologize for calling you accidentally Sites. But Marty Watts, everybody's talking about your show, how interesting you are, how intellectual you are, how much you literally know about everything. And today, you want to tackle Andrew Jackson? How many shows today do you really have the confidence that host knows about Andrew Jackson?
Well,
one, you.
Well, so Andrew Jackson is part of my family history. My great-great-grandfather, James Watts, he was the Western Militia Volunteers of Tennessee. Now, you hear about the Tennessee football team. They're called the Vols, the Volunteers. Well, in 1813, when the War of 1812 started, they asked, at that time, Andrew Jackson was a prominent person in the state of Tennessee, and they made him the militia general, and they formed a volunteer army, militia, and they asked people to join up. And my great-grandfather, James Watts, and Davy Crokett was in the same regiment. I think it was the first regiment.
Your grandfather really got around.
Well, he came to Tennessee around. He was born in Culpeper, Virginia, but his father, Robert Watts, moved to Sumter, Tennessee around 1803. And then he got married and had a family, and he volunteered to fight. At that time, the big enemy was the Creek Indians. They were revolting because, and it makes sense. The Americans were taking over their land, and they put up a fight. They were raiding these settlers in Alabama and Mississippi. But getting back to Andrew Jackson, he had his flaws. He wasn't a perfect guy. He was a great American, but he was a slave owner, and I don't condemn. Slavery is one of the bad things of our history that I hope people understand. It was wrong, and he was a slave owner. Plus, when he was president of the United States, he probably had one of the worst Indian acts. He removed the Cherokee Indians. It was called the Cherokee Removal Act, and he moved them from Georgia and North Carolina to Oklahoma. Now it's Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Now they still have the Cherokee Nation headquarters in Oklahoma, but at that time, the Cherokees was a civilized tribe. They had their own alphabet. They had their own constitution. They were farmers. They weren't a threat to anybody. They weren't raiding people. But their land was prime land in Georgia and North Carolina, and people wanted their land. And Andrew Jackson was able to remove them through legislation. And one of the guys that fought against Andrew Jackson as a congressman was Davy Crokett.
Wow.
So let's get back to Davy Crokett and Andrew Jackson. So around 1814, they had an army of about 1,200 volunteers in Tennessee. They went down to go find the Creek Indians. They were called the Red Sticks. And that battle was called Horseshoe Bend. And it was somewhere around Alabama on a river. And there was about 800 Creek Indians, and he had about 1,200, and they finally tracked him down on this bend called Horseshoe Bend, and the Indians, the river was behind him, and they circled him, and it was a massacre.
The Mississippi River.
No, it was a river around the Alabama, Mississippi. I'm trying to remember, but anyway, it was a very bad incident. The Americans massacred 800 of the 1,000 Indians, so only 200 survived.
Wow.
And it was so bloody, that's the Creek War ended right then. But Davy Crockett and my grandfather was upset about it because it was really a bad thing. And then Davy Crockett, right after the battle, goes to Andrew Jackson and said, I just don't want to be part of this. And James Watts, my grandfather, they wanted to go back to Tennessee, and they were going to be court-martial, and finally Andrew Jackson let him go. And Davy Crockett goes back to his district around Nashville, and he runs for Congress. Later on, of course, Jackson opposed it, and he opposed the Indian Removal Act because that incident. Then my grandfather went back to Sumter, Tennessee, and so what happened was, at that time, the Army, most of them was Tennessee volunteers. Then at that moment, there was a British colony in Pensacola, so half of the people went back to Tennessee. So he marches on to Pensacola and takes over the garrison that was in Spanish territory run by the British. When they found that out, they were going to send an army to New Orleans. And that's good, and that's the famous battle in New Orleans that we're going to talk about. But anyway, Andrew Jackson was not perfect, and I know they're trying to tear down his statue, but the history is history. Things were different in the 19th century, and I can't defend slavery, and I can't defend what he did to the Cherokee Nation. They call it the Trails of Tears. A lot of people died. They went in the middle of the winter. They moved them all out, and the Cherokee Nation had their own alphabet. They were good people. To this day, Oklahoma would not be the same without the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma.
Well, a lot of history books praise Andrew Jackson.
They do, and he did some good things.
Today's writers, if you will, those who are putting out the stories of today, it's a whole different slant. And that's where Jackson is getting a hit today.
He's getting hit on that. But, he formed the Democrat Party. There wouldn't be a Democrat Party. He was the first president to get elected west of Virginia. Was
he the 17th United States president?
I think he was the 6th or 7th president. Boy, you got me on that one. But I will tell you, he was the first guy to be elected outside the 13 colonies.
He had his troubles. What, he was impeached?
No, that was Andrew Johnson was impeached, but not Jackson. Johnson got impeached.
See, the intellect that you are.
But with that saying, he had his flaws. He was no perfect guy, but he's part of the. We wouldn't be a country today without Andrew Jackson, and we're gonna. I think this will lead on to the third segment. We're gonna talk about the Battle of New Orleans and why it changed American history. And there's a lot of good things about that. But you're right; he's taking a hit right now, and he
was the 7th.
Yeah, the 7th president. And with that, thank you, Jimmy. Our producer just said 7th president. But with that saying, you cannot defend slavery, and you can't defend what he did to the Cherokee nations. You just can't. I mean, I don't know how you look at it, and the reason why Davy Crockett left Congress, he got up on the congressional floor and defended the Indians, and they lost. That vote came down to a close vote. Jackson got 5 votes, but Davy Crockett started going after Jackson. And when he ran for re-election, Jackson padded the election, and he got defeated in Tennessee. And then he decided to go to Texas. He decided, well, I'm going to change my life. His wife died. I think Davy Crockett's wife died, and he decided the new lease on life. So him and his friends went to Texas, and you know what happened at the Alamo.
Wow. But he was the king of the wild frontier.
He sure was. And he was a congressman. He fought. And you have to give, Davy Crockett looks good in history because it took a really tough, great guy that stood up to Andrew Jackson after that battle. He didn't want any part of that massacre with the Creek Indians. He decided, I don't want to be part of this.
And I'll give you a little hint to make your day. There's a piece of paper in your wallet, with Andrew Jackson's picture on it. What am I talking about?
$20 bill.
Wow.
And so So my
He
grandfather.
knows his stuff.
But James Watts, my great-great-grandfather, he went back. He didn't stay on either. So it took a great man like Davy Crockett, and then he stood up to him on the congressional floor in Washington, D.C. against that bill with the Cherokees. So anyway, I have more admiration for Davy Crockett. People don't know that part of the story. Of course, he's a hero in Texas in the Battle of Alamo. He took his life defending the state of Texas. So there's a lot, and and Davy Crockett probably wasn't a perfect guy either, Henry. But if it goes down in history, he was a man of principle, and there's something to say about a guy like that.
Amen. Great history lesson. Thank you.
So we're gonna go to the next segment, and let's talk about the Battle of New Orleans. And boy, that kind of changed everything. Welcome back to segment 3. We're going to talk about Andrew Jackson in the battle.
I know why you have me in this room. So you're going to show everybody Henry T. doesn't have the historical intellect that you have. You're amazing. And your grandfather is everywhere.
Well, in that part he was, but he didn't fight in the Battle of New Orleans, okay? He could have, but he went back to Tennessee with the militia.
We ought to do a feature just on Grandpa.
Maybe we should. But anyway, here's the thing about before the Battle of New Orleans. Let me tell you.
The British wanted that territory so badly.
But let's talk about Andrew Jackson at 12, 13 years old. So he's in South Carolina. His older brother, gets killed by the British in the American Revolution. And Andrew Jackson was 12, 13 years old. His mother dies in front of the British soldiers. His mother died. And then he gets captured, and he gets thrown in with these British soldiers. And one of them told him, I want you to shine my shoe. And he wouldn't do it. Shine my boot. And the guy takes a knife and carves him up, and he had a scar. If you look at these old pictures of Jackson, there's a scar. And that was from a British officer there in South Carolina. He hated the British. If there was a guy that had a revenge in him, the Battle of New Orleans, and he did it. And just think about that battle. He had about 600 Tennessee volunteers. He picked up about 200 Marines. They show up, and they had to drag maybe 20, 30 cannons through the swamp from Florida to New Orleans. There was no road. There was no highway. And they get to New Orleans around late December, around Christmas time. And now here's the setup. The British they just got off winning the Battle of Waterloo. Duke Wellington, they beat Napoleon's army, and they send this General Pakenham, who was in the Battle of Waterloo. He brings an army of about 5,000 soldiers, 15, 20 fleet ships. The army, it was like, think about it, it's like New Mexico Lobos playing Alabama. You know, it's like David versus Goliath. And so the one thing that General Andrew Jackson he understood topography, the terrain of a battlefield. And the reason why he won that battle in Horseshoe Bend, he figured out, if I could trap the Indians, I've got them. And he had the upper hand, and he had surprise. So in the Battle of New Orleans, they had to go through these levees and swamp to get there, and he set up a perimeter around New Orleans at that time. And he only had maybe a total of 1,000 guys, the British Army, and he gets to New Orleans. Now, here's the thing. The battle took place on, I think it was January 8, 1815. Now, here's the thing. The War 1812, the Treaty of Ghent was signed 6 days before the battle. So the war was over. They didn't have to fight this battle, but at that time, there was no communication to tell them that the treaty was signed. You know, that ended the war in 1812 with the British. But so this battle, the British wanted to come up. They take New Orleans. They take over the Mississippi River. They divide.
With Pakenham,
the great general. And so here's the thing so here they are, and then so Jackson's trying to put this defense up, and he founds this pirate named John Lafitte, who was a pirate. And he had his own pirate kingdom outside, but he had gunpowder and he had guns. So he went over and got John Lafitte, and the pirates joined him. And then there was a free slave. There was some actually freed black slaves that weren't slaves living in New Orleans. They joined the thing. And then the local people in the community. New Orleans was a small town at that time. So this is the battle. Like I said, it's like the Lobo versus Alabama, David versus Goliath. And it was one of the great battles. But the one thing that nobody understood, the Tennessee guys had the famous Tennessee long rifle. You could shoot like 200 yards down the field with that rifle, and they could pick off the English. And the English came in with the bagpipes, 3,000 soldiers, and they're marching in, and they started picking them off. And then Andrew Jackson told one of his best shooters, and you know, these Tennessee long rifle, he says, you know, the guy with the big, I guess he had a helmet with I guess you call it the flute or the helmet with anyway, you could tell who the general was. He said, I want you to assassinate him. I want you to pick him. And sure enough, in that battle, he gets shot and gets killed. The general gets knocked off, and he dies right in the battle. And the English, their leadership is like cutting a snake by the head. You know, if you cut the snake by the head, they fall apart. And in that battle, they lost almost 1,000 soldiers. And that was the battle. And then they came back for another counterattack in the army. This army of ragtag guys, the Tennessee riflemen, John Lafitte, one of the greatest battles.
But suddenly Jackson's troops gained a lot of confidence.
And that's how
they believed they could win this war.
He got up there and he
1812.
January the 8th, 1815, but the War of 1812. And the thing about Jackson was that he got up there and fought with those guys. He was a leader. That's how he became famous. The reason why he became President of the United States was the Battle of New Orleans. And of course, there's a famous song by Johnny Horton. You probably heard that song. It was a #1 hit back in the 60s, the Battle of New Orleans. And to this day, it's one of I have it on my iPhone. But that battle changed the world. And honestly, it's funny that the war was over, but if the British would have won, who knows, they might have not left. And then here's another thing. He goes back to Florida and takes over Florida, and that was under Spanish control. So think about it. Jackson changed the landscape of this country with his flaws, but you understand, that was a sweet victory. Can you imagine beating the British? This is the army that won Waterloo. They just beat Napoleon. They're there, and the Americans didn't have a chance, supposedly. And that was Jackson. Just because of that one battle, he goes down as one of the great leaders in America. Even though with the flaws he has and all this, but you can't tear down a statue. I mean, if you want to have a honest dialogue about his past, I think that's fair. Like you and I said, that's fair. But don't tear down a statue. He means a lot. There probably wouldn't be a New Orleans with him, or the state of Florida. There's a reason why we have Florida, because of him. So there's a lot of goods and bad, but that battle, God, I would love to be there that day when the British got stopped. Can you imagine? They had the Scottish Guard, the bagpipes, 3,000 soldiers, and he stopped them dead. And and I think the difference was those Tennessee riflemen. They had that, they call it the Tennessee rifle that shot 200 yards, and they picked off these guys. So what a battle.
Wow. That's a great story.
Well, people
you spelled it out in such a way where he truly was the hero of that day.
That day he was.
Now, the news commentators tonight would tell the attributes, the highlights of this man, Andrew Jackson. Well, we would be applauding him.
But right now they're talking about slavery and the Indian removal, and that's fair game, in my opinion. That's fair game. But he was more than that. Now think about it. Danny Gonzalez, he goes in to USC. We're underdogs, and remember, USC is the British Army. They just got through beating.
Wow, that's a big analogy.
They just got through beating Notre Dame.
Beautiful.
And here's the little Lobos, Danny Gonzalez and the boys going into the Coliseum. And there's Tommy Trojan with the big white horse. It's David versus Goliath. and we knock them off. We beat them.
And the word confidence.
Confidence.
Ooh.
And there's Rocky Long.
Snatch it right out of the big stadium.
And there's Rocky Long and his defense, and the Trojans are 5 touchdowns favorite. That's what the Battle of New Orleans was to the United States. Compared to the Lobos going against USC in the Coliseum. Tommy Trojan, we knock them off, you know. Now that would be a story. If we go in and beat USC, would Danny Gonzalez be a folk hero? He would. That's what happened to Andrew Jackson. He would go down as one of the greatest upsets all time in New Mexico football. And that's how I see this Battle of New Orleans. I mean, in some comparison, that's what it was.
That's a great way to express all this, and a wonderful way to compare it. Wow.
Because that's what it was. And a ragtime, can you imagine a ragtime bunch of guys from Valley High School, Sandy, and these kids from the state, but God, they want to beat the Trojans. The Trojan gets all the national press, they're on national television, and then the little Lobos
and
come
it
in.
happens. It could happen.
It could happen. Anything can happen. Leadership is so important. And then Danny Gonzalez out leading the boys onto the Coliseum. That's the Battle of New Orleans. Marty Watts' version.
I wish I could high-five you. That deserves a high-five.
So that's what America Talk It Up is. We're here to inspire. And by the way, we're here to promote love and laughter. The best gift you can give anybody is laughter and love, right, Henry? And we're here to pump people up. But we do want people to know other sides of the story. And history is not pretty. You know, there's some beautiful things about history, but not everything's perfect about our past. But we have to come together as a country. All races. We're one country, and this is a great country we live in, Henry. The way we can bring people together, and that's why it's important that you and I promote love and peace. I love that song, John Lennon, Give Peace a Chance.
Yeah. Well, you know, I have hold now in my possession, because of this history lesson, a whole new story, and the analogy, the comparison with USC and the Lobos, it really describes it for me. How about you?
So that's what makes that's what makes us a great people. So with that, you know, I think we should end the segment, and we want to encourage people to go out and give it their best. And I love these stories. That's why I love the underdog. And I love stories like that, you know. So anyway, with that said, I hope this segment of American Talk It Up, I hope people enjoy this. And please go and subscribe on YouTube. Please go up to Facebook. And we're planning on getting this show on Comcast TV sometime probably by late July. But we're really looking forward to getting more people that really enjoy what we have to say.
Well, thank you for letting me sit here and just be this history student. Thank you.
Well, I just love history and sports, and there's something about history and sports that is good. Right?
Wow.
So anyway, Henry, Ashababa.
Ole. Wow. I look forward to the next time.
Next segment, next show. Okay.
Will be with us. Wow.